Shalom, everybody, and welcome back to Window on Mount Zion. This time we're doing Chapter 7 and Part 2, and it's a continuation of the Six-Day War, and today is Monday, June the 5th, 1967. At daybreak, as usual, I scattered the grain for the pigeons and doves. Some were eating out of my hand as the sparrows waited for the gleanings. Tamar, my little dog, at a safe distance behind a closed gate, watched with interest. There seemed to be fewer birds than usual this morning, as though they had sensed the danger and had stayed away. This peaceful hour on Mount Zion at sunrise seemed on this morning of June the 5th to have a special significance. The rising sun, the lightening sky, the fluttering wings, the bird's song, and the fragrance of flowers were all, as usual, evidence of heavenly powers, gifts of God to the earth and to mankind, regardless of good and evil. I walked around the garden where the tall white Madonna lilies in all their purity shyly hung their heads and mingled their perfume with that of the gay frilly blossoms of the sweet peas covering the wall behind them. The pink, blue, and white larkspur, tall and heavy with blossom, mingled around the lemon tree, already hung with its ripe yellow fruit. Different colored petunias and verbenas were massed to make a carpet between the taller flowers, and hibiscus buds were turning scarlet, and the branches of the oleanders were bent low with their profusion of sweet-scented pink blossoms. I looked at the jacaranda tree in its exposed position. It had grown tall and strong, its young branches already giving shade to the hot corner. If it survived the war, it would flower the following year. The garden seemed to be singing with joy, with each plant displaying its color and form. I looked over the stone wall of the garden to the corrugated iron fence on the border, and behind it the fortified Jordanian military post. I saw some of our soldiers walking up the hill, and military vehicles were all around our military post. The joy of the garden remained enclosed in its surrounding wall. But beyond the wall, the stillness was heavy with foreboding. The quiet was broken by the footsteps of soldiers passing the house and entering the gallery building next door. Everybody seemed to be waiting for that dreadful thing which meant death, destruction, and suffering, fascinated by its evil spell, which could drive men to the depths of cruelty and horror, and could also raise them to heights of self-sacrifice, brotherly love, and endurance. I went indoors with a heavy heart, but I could also feel waves of excitement passing through me. Were we on the threshold of another chapter of our history? Another step forward in the plan of God for Israel, in whose destiny the whole world was involved? Albert and Raymond were preparing to go into the city. Albert had a matter to attend to at the foreign ministry. They would also look for some more provisions. We'd been told to collect a store of food to last at least 2 weeks. The shops had already been emptied of most essential foodstuffs days ago. As I watched our car with Albert, Raymond, and Tamar disappearing down the hill, I saw Yona approaching. "What have you come for?" I asked in surprise. "I forgot some important things," she answered, "but I'll not be here long. Paulita and I are well set up in town. I would much rather be here with you," she continued, "but of course I could not stay here without Paulita." Yona went into the gallery, and I began to sort out a few provisions to take into the gallery just in case. While I was packing a box with necessaries, Danny came in and asked, "Did you hear the news on the radio?" "No," I replied, looking at him intently. "Is it war?" He nodded his head. "It has started in Gaza." Where is Albert? He's in town with Raymond and Tamar. He looked worried. Everyone in town was told to go into their shelters and remain there. The battle may start also in Jerusalem. He ran off to his post, calling to me to go into the gallery. It has started. Danny's words rang in my ears. How many young men, Israeli and Egyptians, had already lost their lives? It had started. Death, suffering, agony, destruction. I thought of the prophet Jeremiah's words. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. His steps were directed by the powers which he served and obeyed. The power which gave life and peace on the one hand, or the power which led man to death and destruction on the other. The discernment of these hidden powers is the greatest wisdom we can have, for darkness sometimes appears in the garb of light. So now we begin war on Mount Zion. As I was finishing packing the box of provisions, I looked out to Garden Square. There was nobody to be seen. A stillness had overtaken Mount Zion, a quietness from which peace had fled, leaving only a silence breathless and fearsome, awaiting maybe death. How long would it be? As I reached the floor of the stairs with the box of provisions, the silence died. Suddenly the noise of machine gun shells and rifle fire rent the air. Bullets were flying in all directions, and as they hit the walls, I knew that I must leave everything and make a dash for the gallery. Remembering a pot of potatoes cooking on the stove, I ran upstairs to the kitchen to turn off the gas, trying to avoid the windows. Then I made a dive for the open door of the gallery which faced the Jordanian soldiers, and above which our soldiers were returning fire. Yona stood inside with her case packed, ready to leave. Her thoughts were centered on Polita and how she could get to her. We heard the whiz of shells going over into the city. I wondered where Albert and Raymond were and hoped they were not exposed to the bullets and shells. We spoke little as we stood listening. Then we heard a car stop not far from our door, and moments later 2 men rushed into the gallery. 2 priests, members of one of the churches on Mount Zion. We looked at them in astonishment. "How did you get here?" we asked. "We were on our way from the city when it started. There was nothing to be done but continue. Bullets were flying all around us, but as you see, we have arrived safely." They could not go farther than the gallery. The path to the church was fraught with too many dangers, so they stayed with us. The noise was deafening and continuous. It sounded as if every bullet hit the wall of the gallery and every explosion was outside the door. The play of sound was very misleading. Yona paced the floor, deeply troubled. "I left Polita in the kindergarten, and I was to call for her at lunchtime. She will be so frightened. I must get to her somehow." We tried to comfort her and reassure her with the thought that all the children would be in a shelter and well cared for. I had my own anxieties about Albert and Raymond. Half an hour passed, and the ring of the telephone could scarcely be heard above the din of the battle. With great relief, I heard Albert's voice on the line, and the telephone was still working. "We got caught at the ministry," he said. "I am in a shelter here, but I do not know where Raymond is, and we left Tamar in the car. The shelling is fairly heavy, but do not worry and keep in a safe place." Later, there was another phone call from Albert. "We are now all together in a shelter at the King's Hotel. Tamar has survived the shock of the noise. We'll be staying here while the shelling of the city goes on." I was greatly relieved that they were safe. A call also came through some time later from Yona's friends. Polita is with us in a shelter. All is well. We will take good care of her. How deeply thankful we were for the phone. There was no lull in the fighting that whole day. Shots were being fired from above the gallery and from all the posts around us. Also, the bullets and shells were coming from the other side of Mount Zion. It was a great battle. Jerusalem, city of peace, heralding by its name its ultimate destiny, now was once again being lashed by the enemies of peace. At dusk, in a short interval in which the firing seemed less intense, I ran across to the house and grabbed the box of provisions which I'd left near the door in the morning. We had not eaten the whole day, nor had anything to drink. But that night we had some biscuits and cheese, and with a little water we made some coffee. Later I could again run into the house and get some more provisions. But Yona was getting restless. Now that it is dark, I will try to walk down the steps into the city. I must get to Polita. No, that would be suicide, we told her, as we listened to the continuing fury of the battle over the city. I think I could find the secret tunnel under Mount Zion used by the soldiers, she continued. But we sought to calm her and dissuade her from endangering her life. We began to look for the safest place to put up our beds. There was a space between two large stone pillars which would give us protection from the bullets and flying shrapnel that could come through the open ironwork of the door. The 4 beds fitted into this space without an inch between them. The 2 priests chose to be pressed against the stone pillars, and Yona and I lay side by side on the beds in the middle. We tried to sleep, but it was impossible. The battle for Jerusalem raged all night with unabated fury. Added to the deafening noise of shells and bullets was the roar of warplanes over Mount Zion. In waves, they came in from the desert with such speed and power, scooping up every other sound in their path, and then casting it all back to earth with such a thunderous roar that it seemed as if our ears would be shattered. We listened to all the firing on Mount Zion, not knowing which was from our side and which from the Arabs, and because every shot and explosion always sounded as if it was destined for our wall, I imagined that little would be left of our house. Perhaps it had already been reduced to greater ruin than when we first saw it. We had the radio on all the time. During that terrible night, in the midst of all the shooting, there were strains of most wonderful music, which mingled with or was sporadically drowned out by the guns and shell fire. Never was music so sweet or so soothing to our nerves. We heard on the radio that the United Nations headquarters had been taken by the Jordanians. Not much later, it was in Israeli hands. There was fierce fighting to the right of us on the hill of Abu Tor, also on Mount Scopus and in the Meir Sha'arim quarter in the city. Then we heard that 400 Egyptian planes had been destroyed. We looked at one another. That is surely impossible, someone remarked. They must have made a mistake in the announcement, said Yona. Perhaps they meant 40. But there had been no mistake in the announcement. During the night, Yona and I had to brave the bullets and flying shrapnel and go upstairs. The toilet was situated on the open roof next to the room where our soldiers were shooting from, behind sandbagged windows. On this open roof, the whizzing of shells and bullets and the noise of their hitting the stones seemed so unreal that we did not fully comprehend the danger in which we stood. A great blaze in front of the Dormition church lit up the whole area, and suddenly the dome of the church went up in flames. We crept along the wall to the stone steps and as we descended again into the gallery, flares were falling, filling the passageway between our house and the gallery with a flood of light. How beautiful the tracery of the ironwork of the doors looked, with their bits of pointed and curled iron darkly silhouetted against the light, like the leaves of trees against a bright sun. We all four returned to our beds, lying very quiet and still, hoping we would be able to sleep a little. But before long, we had our own battle to fight with the sandflies, those tiny, almost invisible insects which torment humans living on the edge of the desert and include Mount Zion in their sphere of action. They came in full strength, without screens on the windows to hinder them or on the door. Their attack nearly drove us crazy. The minute injections which they left under the skin in place of the blood they had extracted covered every part of our exposed skin with swelling red lumps and an itch which never abated. Nobody could lie still any longer. In the early hours of the morning, there was a slight lull, as some of our Nachal boys came in to see if we were all right, and to let us know that all was well with them. How relieved we were to see them. They could only stay a few moments. The commander came down from the room on the roof and told us our boys were encircling the old city. When it was daylight, one of our companions accompanied me into the house. Everything looked all right downstairs, but we did not go upstairs as bullets were still flying at the same time. We grabbed a few more provisions and a paraffin stove and ran back into the gallery. The lull did not last long. Suddenly, heavy shooting started in earnest again, and nobody was in sight. Well, that is the end of part 2. And we will continue with the following day, which would be Tuesday, June the 6th, in part 3 of chapter 4, next time on Window on Mount Zion. Shalom.